It's already record, and I will start sharing my presentation here, full screen, peninjauan, peragaan, slide, yeah. Here, our audience, yeah, we have new logo, but this logo has not been approved yet by board of directors and by us all. It is just temporary. My name is Almizan Ulfa. I am assigned as project secretary and chairman of the foundation for managing the university called Yayasan Mestika Literata Indonesia. Okay, so we'll start that actually initiative of establishing this university is a Wuhan corona disease starting in Wuhan, China late 2019, and it's spreading fast all over the world. Yeah, and in Indonesia we are obliged. Yeah, we are forced to work from home in March 2020. So we can go. We couldn't go anywhere. We can go to mall. We can go to supermarket. We can go to cafe, and actually, we are not allowed to meet people. So we communicate with WhatsApp, Telegram, and Zoom. And suddenly, there is several players hit us, yeah, advertising online degree. So I share my idea to we are groups of Indonesian Researcher Association, and fortunately it is welcome, and we'll start talking about establishing Jakarta Digital University. And in the meantime, we are aware that massive open online courses spreading fast to Indonesia. For example, University of People, we heard a lot about University of the People in the USA, Seoul Digital University in Korea, and Coursera platforms. This is all over the world, yeah, America, UK, Australia, Russia, and etc. Okay, and then what we have done, yeah, what we have done is writing executive summary proposal of establishing GDU. We conducted several Zoom meetings with a director of Ministry of Education, preparing several documents needed to get license from Ministry of Education, conducting webinars related with education and public policy. And we have already website, jakartadigitaluniversity.com. So .com means we are not officially registered as education institution. And then we are establishing Yayasan Mestika Literata Indonesia. This yayasan is chaired by Dr. Junaini Gani, and board of supervisory is headed by Dr. Agus Panal Sukri. He is here now already, and chairman of the operational is myself, Almizan Ulfa. And here we already present Pak Muller. He is secretary of managing institution. And also already here is Edmalia Romani. He is our treasurer. Our degree programs, our degree programs at the moment is about renewable energy, smart farming, computer and data science, business, public policy, law, and language. We'll also conduct several online courses, especially right now in language French. We expect we could launch these courses in February 2021, and we are still recruiting partners for Korean language, Arabic, English, Mandarin, Japan, and German. There are 2 people. Okay, there are 2 people coming. So outstanding features of online extremely low cost, flexible, personalized learning, and of high quality. Oh, peragaan slide. Okay. Now we are going to do open recruitments for JDU Board of Trustee, JDU President. Like we have one online university right now, Universitas Cyber Asia. Director is from Korea, Jang Yeon Cho, Professor Jang Yeon Cho. And we are going to recruit also national and international tutors or lecturers. Then that's all, I think. Salute. Correct me. In Korean, Goma Wayo. That means merci beaucoup or terima kasih banyak. Then I would like to show you our website. Our website here. Here. Where is it? Now I want to go to, here. I think I need to small this, where is it? Yeah. Okay. Boy. It's down. Where is it? Escape. Yeah. Okay. Simpan. I lost my Zoom. Where is it? Oh, here. Here we go. Okay. Here could you see it? Our website? Hello?
Yeah.
Here. This is under development. Jakarta, we have beranda, prodi, kursus, webinar, degree, fasilitas, konsultasi, recruitment, here, and so on. Selamat datang, welcome. visi misi, yeah, here, why you should go to JDU program, what we call a degree programs, vocation. And here, yeah, there is here, but the picture is not properly arranged. We have Pak Junaidi Gani, it's me, Fuad, Professor Fuad, uh, Mariati, Yati, Dedi, Reno. It is not properly uploaded. So we miss Pak Agus, not yet here, Pak Muller, Mbak Edmalia, and Bu Santi is not here also. We are still developing it. Yeah. Okay. And I think right now I would let the Pak Chandra lead the meeting. And Pak Chandra is a long-time friend with me. We went to high school together. We went to university together in Palembang. And we got a job at the same ministry, Ministry of Finance, long ago. And then we went to America together at the same aircraft. However, Pak Chandra was sent to San Diego State University for preparation, and I was sent to Boulder, Colorado, mountainous area, very cool, freezing. We came at the winter. It's minus 10 degree at that time. And then we meet again when we come back to Ministry of Finance. Then when we retired, we meet again. We are together establishing the Jakarta Digital University. And also we have long-time friends with Pak John Barus and Pak Muller. I just met Bu Edmalia and Madam Santi. And Pak Agus just met just about recently, about 2 or 3 years earlier. Pak Chandra, time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Amizan Ulfa, who acts as the host for this seminar, for interesting as the moderator. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat sore, salam sejahtera. First, I would like to say hello to our main speaker, Mr. Kim, Mr. Kyunghoon Kim.
Good afternoon.
Exactly. Good afternoon. Nice to see you. Nice to have you here, as you are the first foreigner that participates in the web seminar held by GDU, Jakarta Digital University in construction, under construction. Yeah. Okay. First, I would like to congratulate you for your success, in getting your PhD degree from.
Thank you.
I think a few months ago, as you are from Korea, as I told you 2 nights ago, I happened to have gone to your country, first to Seoul in 2014, in 2013, and then to Daegu in 2014, both for attending a conference held by Korean Association of Public Administrations, and I presented my papers there. It's very nice to see Seoul. Seoul is very advanced city. It's like a city in America or in Europe, very modern city. It's very nice. Next, I would like to say hello to other participants, Mr. Muller, Mr. John Barus, Mr. Boy, Mr. Kunus Tamrin, Ibu Edmalia, Ibu Santi, Ibu Nur Aini. And maybe other guests, yeah, that that are coming late. Yeah. Okay. Back to our business. As we all know, the topic Mr. Kim will talk about is about state capitalism in Indonesia. Yeah. Is it going to survive or sustainable? It is very interesting topic. Yeah. Okay, for this talk, Mr. Kim will have 20 minutes for presenting his case. Yeah. Then after that, uh, our panelist, but Mr. Almizan, since there is no panelist today, yeah, so as agreed in the preparatory meeting 2 nights ago, both of us will become panelists, right? And then after Mr. Kim speaks, then you and I will ask questions, will comment Mr. Kim's presentation. And then after Mr. Kim has responded to our questions, then other participants can ask questions or comments. Yeah. In this case, please write the questions in the chat room. Yeah, so that I can read them to Mr. Kim. Yeah, for the answer. Okay. Please feel free to ask questions. Either in English or Bahasa Indonesia. If it is in Bahasa, then I will try my best to translate them into English. At the end of the discussion, I will hopefully will make some comment or some conclusions from this talk. Okay. Now, if there is no other questions or other comments from all of you, I would like to ask Mr. Kim to begin his presentation. Mr.
Pak
Kim?
Chandra, excuse
Yes.
me a moment, Pak Chandra.
Okay.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about Pak Kim. Who is he?
Okay. I think you already talked about him, but as far as I know, Mr. Mr. Kyunghoon Kim is from Korea. He previously worked as a researcher at Samsung Corporation, and then he continued his study to England to get his master degree or PhD degree in political economy and public policy, I think. And then he succeeded in completing his PhD after writing many publications in international journal about state capitalism or state enterprises in Indonesia. Yeah, so it is very interesting, very important for us as Indonesians to know what is happening to our state enterprises. Yeah. Okay, and then Mr. Kim has already completed his study. Now he is doing some research. I think in his college, yeah, is the King's College in London. So hopefully, after you have done your research, you will get a very good job, yeah, anywhere in the world, yeah. Maybe you also can become the advisor to Indonesian Ministry of State Enterprises, maybe, yeah.
I'll be very honored.
Yeah, because you are very knowledgeable by now about Indonesian enterprises of the government. Okay, so so if there is no other comments from Pak Almizan or other speakers or other participants, I will ask Mr. Kim to begin your presentation. Okay, right? But
Thank you very much for
Arizan?
that introduction, and thank you
Okay.
for inviting me to the webinar. Pak Almizan, could you unlock the share screen button?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, thank you very much. So I'll start the presentation. Thank you again for inviting me to this webinar. So in this presentation, I'll discuss some of the concerns that experts and the media have expressed on the resurgence of state capitalism in Indonesia since the mid-2010s. My aim is not to argue that the Indonesian government should withdraw state-owned entities from the national development strategy because of these issues, but instead it should devise a plan to address these weak points in order to make developmental state capitalism sustainable. I will first address some of the major characteristics of Indonesia's development strategy led by the state-owned sector. The graph on the left shows the size of state enterprises' assets as a share of the GDP. This share began to increase from the early 2010s and expansion accelerated from the mid-2010s. This notable expansion over the past 5 years has been the result of the Jokowi government's considerable support to the state-owned sector. The most important support measure has been in the form of government capital injection into state enterprises. The graph on the right illustrates that capital injections in 2015 and 2016 was 23 times larger than that of the previous 2 years. Capital injections were then smaller in the later years of Jokowi's first term, but have started to increase again during the early years of the second term. The Jokowi government has also supported state enterprises using other measures such as tax incentives for fixed asset revaluation, lower dividend ratios, state-directed loans, and development project assignment. The overall strategy to revive economic development was as follows. The Jokowi government has actively mobilized state enterprise to finance and construct infrastructure. Furthermore, the government, state commercial banks, and development banks have substantially increased funding to these state enterprises. During the 2000s, there was limited progress in infrastructure development because of the government's passive approach and the private sector's limited interest. In contrast, infrastructure construction performance under state enterprise-led strategy in the second half of the 2010s was impressive. Between 2015 and 2018, Indonesia built 782 kilometers of new toll roads. This distance is longer than the length of toll roads that Indonesia had built during the 4 decades until 2014. The Jokowi government also emphasized the importance of adding value to natural resources. Sectoral holding companies in energy and mining industries were established, and they now leverage their enlarged assets to nationalize natural resources and increase investment in resource processing and refining. The government has also supported state enterprises in capital-intensive manufacturing sectors. Companies in these sectors have been growing rapidly due to the recent infrastructure boom and government procurement and support. Companies in technology-intensive sectors have successfully exported airplanes, trains, and ships to a number of foreign countries. During the first year of Jokowi's second term, the state-owned sector was assigned another key developmental mission. The Jokowi government placed the state-owned sector at the forefront of the strategy to overcoming the economic and health crisis induced by COVID-19. Jokowi appointed Erick Thohir, the Minister of State Enterprises, as Chief Executive of the National COVID-19 Mitigation and Economic Recovery Committee. Further, many aspects of the government's stimulus package are aimed at supporting state enterprises. The government announced that it would provide 125 trillion rupiah to state enterprises on top of the state capital injection that it was going to provide for the original 2020 budget. While some of this support aims to rescue weak state enterprises, a large part of it is designated to state enterprises which play a pivotal role in addressing the pandemic and ensuring recovery through various methods. Firstly, the government expects state enterprises to provide vital goods and services such as fuel, electricity, fertilizer, and transportation at affordable prices during difficult times. Secondly, the government relies on state-owned pharmaceutical companies to produce medicine and vaccines to fight COVID-19. State enterprises have also been assigned to provide medical items such as masks, protective equipment, and ventilators using the corporate social responsibility budget. Thirdly, state-owned financial companies are providing much needed liquidity to the economy by expanding government-sponsored microfinance and restructuring existing debt. Finally, state enterprises have been assigned to continue implementing major development projects, such as the Trans-Sumatra Toll Road, and contribute to investment expansion. So it is apparent that the state-owned sector has been playing a key role in Indonesia's development since the mid-2010s. Yes, there have been delays and inefficiencies, but if one considers the massive development challenges that Indonesia is currently facing, as well as the weak progress in previous development programs that rely on the private sector, particularly in infrastructure, I believe that assigning state-owned entities to lead national development projects was a practical decision. However, sustaining this developmental state capitalism is not simple. There have been many cases, such as in Brazil and Malaysia, where the mobilization of state-owned entities has been interrupted as it faced many economic, political, and societal issues. Indonesia has also experienced the deterioration of its state enterprises' reputation just before Jokowi came into office, when the Hambalang and Riau corruption scandals illustrated the entanglement of state enterprises, policymakers, and politicians. For the remainder of this presentation, I'll go through the potential challenges in sustaining developmental state capitalism and the government's justifications for and responses to some of these challenges. Firstly, we have seen the debt level of state-owned sector increase rapidly. In particular, state enterprises in the utilities and construction sector have seen their debt expand significantly throughout the process of conducting larger scale infrastructure projects. During this period, state-owned financial companies have participated in funding these state enterprises and have also experienced an increase in debt, as the graph on the right displays. The government agrees that state enterprises' financial health requires close monitoring, but argues that the current situation is neither unreasonable nor threatening. If looking at state enterprises as a whole, I also believe that this issue is not a major risk in the short term, at least. The expansion of public debt is inevitable in financing development projects, the benefits of which will be reaped in the long term. Because government spending is limited with a fiscal rule that caps annual fiscal deficits at 3% of GDP, the government has mobilized state enterprises to implement debt-financed development projects. Indonesia's fiscal situation is relatively strong, with government debt equivalent to 30% of GDP, meaning that it has the ability to cushion the effects if state enterprises are to struggle with short-term liquidity and refinancing risks. On an individual basis, many of the largest state enterprises continue to have a stable financial profile, and investor confidence is holding up, as reflected in the bond issuance oversubscription this year. There are, of course, many state enterprises with poor performance, though most of these enterprises are small in size, so unlikely to cause systematic risks. Based on the Altman Z score, state enterprises in the manufacturing sector are particularly weak, though the developmental mission in strategic sectors such as the defense industry is difficult to analyze using only financial indicators. In response to the criticism of the expanding debt, the Ministry of Finance has continued its monitoring role and shared the risk profile based on its macro stress test model. Next, criticisms have been made on the methods used to reorganize state enterprises. Since the mid-2010s, the major reorganization method has been creating sectoral holding companies. Over the past 5 years, holding companies have been designated and established in mining, energy, pharmaceutical, and insurance sectors. The government is planning to create further holding companies in other sectors such as tourism and infrastructure. The government has also created sub-level holding companies by combining state enterprises subsidiaries in the same sector. We have recently seen the establishment of sub-level holding companies in Islamic banking and hospital sectors. The government argues that holding company structures are the most effective way of creating synergy, as stronger firms can help weaker firms in the rationalization process, and of finding sources for expanding investment by leveraging enlarged assets. Simultaneously, the government has stopped privatization altogether. The graph on the right shows that there have been no privatization proceeds since 2015. So this government's sole focus on creating holding companies has been criticized. Some experts have argued that holding companies may have beneficial effects in some sectors, but not in all, meaning that each sector needs a tailored reorganization method that considers a number of aspects. Furthermore, the critics have highlighted that the negative effects may outweigh the positive effects, as weaker firms could pull down healthier firms under the same holding company. Some experts have also pointed out that holding companies, while looking neater in terms of corporate arrangement, may hinder corporate governance as their subsidiaries can hide under a new umbrella structure. I believe that these criticisms have a number of valid points, and the government has begun to respond. The Ministry of State Enterprises has abandoned the long-term goal of creating a super holding company, which was deemed unrealistic and its effects uncertain. The ministry is taking measures to enhance the internal structure of holding companies too. For example, Pertamina, the energy holding company, has recently reduced the number of directors from 11 to 6 and started to organize its numerous subsidiaries by creating subsectoral holding companies. Furthermore, since last year, the ministry has been considering the revision of Government Regulation 41 of 2003 in order for the ministry to gain greater capacity and autonomy in implementing diverse reorganization methods, including liquidation, mergers, and spin-offs. There have also been concerns about how deep and how far state enterprises will go. Over the past 5 years, there has been a notable expansion of state enterprises' market share across various economic sectors. The graph on the far left illustrates that the state bank share in Indonesia's total loans increased from 34% in 2014 to 42% in 2020. The market share of Semen Indonesia in the cement industry increased from 39% in 2018 to 53% in 2019 after acquiring Holcim Indonesia, the third largest producer in the country. Another case of an increase in market share through mergers and acquisition is that of Inalum. Inalum's market share in the mining sector expanded after its acquisition of a stake of Freeport Indonesia and Vale Indonesia. It is also clear that state enterprises' market share has increased markedly in the construction sector with the expansion of their order books at a breakneck speed. State enterprises are not only expanding market shares in their traditional areas, but also actively entering new emerging sectors. For instance, mining companies Inalum and Antam, energy company Pertamina, and electricity company BUMN have together created the company Indonesia Battery Holding in order to enter the growing electric vehicle battery industry. A number of state enterprises have also co-invested to create a financial technology platform, Link Aja, which provides electronic money services. And private firms have made complaints about state enterprises' growing market shares and highlighted that this unfettered expansion would harm the investment environment. In return, the government says that market share expansion is a feature of only select business areas that it deems as strategic, such as finance, mining, and infrastructure-related sectors. It argues that the government's involvement is key in fixing market failures and protecting strategic assets in these sectors. Simultaneously, it argues that a growing market share partly reflects state enterprises' competitiveness. I believe there is some truth to these counter-arguments, though there are numerous other areas, such as retail, in which the necessity of the state's role is questionable. The government also argues that state enterprises are devising plans to enter new industries in order to be in an advantageous bargaining position before powerful foreign companies enter the country to tap into its large resources and market. For instance, the battery holding company is currently negotiating with Chinese and Korean companies seeking to establish electric vehicle-related manufacturing bases in Indonesia. Furthermore, Link Aja has recently invited Singapore's Grab to become a shareholder. In contrast, the government's entry into new sectors in which there already exist major domestic players has been infrequent. For example, while there was speculation that the government may enter the ride-hailing services and compete against Indonesia's Gojek, the government stated that it was only a rumor. For now, the government's counter-argument about new industries seems to hold. The next issue that could harm the sustainability of developmental state capitalism is corruption. Corruption cases are numerous and range from petty misconduct to deep-rooted fraud. There have been accusations of Bayerland's previous boss receiving graft in relation to Riau coal-fired power plant, and Petral's previous boss receiving bribes in relation to oil imports. Perhaps the corruption case that has gained the most attention has been that of Garuda Airlines boss smuggling a Harley-Davidson motorbike and Brompton bicycles from France using the company's Airbus A330. There have also been corruption cases so significant that they even shook the foundation of companies. There's been the mismanagement of funds at Azaburi and Jiwasraya, both of which have caused losses exceeding 10 trillion rupiah. Allegedly, there's been large-scale financial market manipulation and money laundering at these state-owned financial companies. The government has also acknowledged this corruption problem, but has suggested that it is caused by immoral individuals. Furthermore, it has been suggested that a long list of unveiled corruption cases is the evidence of Indonesia's strong monitoring institutions. The government argues that it has acted quickly when uncovering corruption cases and cooperated with various public organs to make individuals pay heavily. For example, 6 people were sentenced to life imprisonment in the Jiwasraya corruption case. In this regard, the government's counter-argument is unsatisfactory. Considering the repetition of incidences of corruption at state enterprises, there's more to it than individualistic misbehavior. There's obviously a structural issue behind this problem. Therefore, I doubt that this problem will disappear anytime soon if the government continues to hold its view. And the accumulation of corruption cases will seriously damage the reputation of and public support for developmental state capitalism. Related to the previous point, there have also been concerns about nepotism in the state-owned sector. Many commissioner positions have been given to the president's supporters during the first and second terms. Critics have highlighted that some of the individuals that occupy these posts do not have relevant experience or capabilities. At the same time, the Ministry of State Enterprises continuously receives recommendations for state enterprises' high-ranking positions from various lawmakers and bureaucrats who want their slice of the pie. The government argues that the inclusion of the president's supporters reflects diversity on boards, and that supporters are important agents who can translate the government's goals into state enterprises' action. Regardless of the government's justifications, the nepotistic appointment of close supporters into key positions of state enterprises is widespread in many competitive democratic systems in which the ruler must compensate backers. Realistically, these acts will not cease to exist. Given this somewhat pessimistic view, I believe that the government should more carefully match the experience of politically linked appointees with state enterprises' needs and clearly communicate the suitability and capacity of the appointees, rather than vaguely stating that they have good leadership and are diligent. Another concern is the business background of the Minister of State Enterprises, Erick Thohir. The government and supporters have highlighted that Erick Thohir's connection to the business world is an important asset as state enterprises seek to adopt better management systems and to strengthen cooperation with private businesses. The government and supporters have also argued that Erick Thohir's weak political affiliation is a strength. Firstly, the view about political connection is obviously untrue. The business politics boundary is fluid in Indonesia, and many people from the business world are directly and indirectly embedded in the political world. Erick Thohir may not be loyal to certain political parties, but he became a politician in a broad sense the moment that he led the president's re-election campaign team in 2019. There's also concern about Erick Thohir's connection to Indonesia's business groups. He's one of the main figures in Indonesia's business world, and many people close to him, including his brother, are some of the richest capitalists in Indonesia who own large conglomerates, as we can see in this diagram. Several civil organizations have highlighted how the capital city relocation project and the recently adopted omnibus law could benefit the country's largest companies connected to politicians. More immediately, I suspect that state enterprises' recent massive investment has already benefited the country's large companies in one way or another. Of course, one could argue that some companies linked to the minister benefiting from the national development strategy is inevitable, as they are some of the largest companies in the country. If this is true, then the ministry or the minister himself should clearly communicate how and why these companies are benefiting, and that the relevant processes that benefited them have been fair and logical. Before the ministry clarifies these areas, there will continue to be suspicions about behind-the-door deals, which could significantly damage the reputation of developmental state capitalism. In one of my academic papers, I described development strategy during Jokowi's first term as restrained state capitalism, as countries' various institutions acted as checks and balances on state enterprises' activities. For example, we have seen how the implementation of the Jakarta-Bandung high-speed rail project has been slowed by a range of ministries with own separate mandates. However, the level of constraint depends on many different aspects, and there are factors that make me think that this level may weaken. Jokowi now has a larger political coalition and does not need to worry about re-election. Further, many institutions have been centralized over the past 5 years. Therefore, in order to leave a greater legacy, Jokowi may prioritize speed over other important aspects and be in a better position to achieve his goals compared to his first term. Apparently, after the re-election, Jokowi was quoted as saying that there is only one vision and mission. There's no vision and mission of ministers, and the same goes for state enterprises. Another key concern is the future of key monitoring bodies. We are yet to determine the effects of the new law on Corruption Eradication Commission on KPK's investigative capacity in terms of state enterprises. Finally, I want to highlight that the amount of information on state enterprises and accessibility to said information need to improve significantly. Without sufficient information, distrust of developmental state capitalism will only increase. As a scholar who studies Indonesian state enterprises, I have probably visited the Ministry of State Enterprises website every week over the past 5 years and find that the amount of information has become much more limited over the past year. Of course, working on a new website designs is understandable when there's a new minister, but we are now entering the second year of the second Jokowi administration, and there continue to be web pages that say under construction, and there are very few documents. The power to demand further information lies with the ultimate owners, which I believe are Indonesian citizens. State enterprises' assets are larger than the country's total stock market capitalization, and they translate into 32 million rupiah per person in Indonesia. Therefore, Indonesian friends watching this clip, you have the right to demand more information on your state enterprises. So I've discussed some of the concerns that experts in the media have expressed regarding the resurgence of state capitalism in Indonesia and the government's justifications for and responses to these concerns. I think that there have been some productive discussions on economic issues surrounding state capitalism. Balancing fiscal stability and development project implementation, devising a suitable reorganization method, and determining state enterprises' appropriate business scope would require a continuation of the discussion between the government and stakeholders. However, I've also found that the government's justifications for and responses to concerns about corruption, nepotism, inter-bureaucracy checks and balances, and information accessibility have so far been disappointing. As seen in countries such as Brazil and Malaysia, the public's dissatisfaction with or even anger towards these issues and the political backlash that follows could seriously disrupt the course of developmental state capitalism. I hope that the government works harder towards communicating with and persuading the public on key issues on state enterprises in order to sustain developmental state capitalism under democracy. However, we should not be so naive as to think that big businesses, bureaucrats, and politicians would share information willingly, particularly when said information concerns increasing their own personal benefits. Here is where civil society organizations, activists, the media, and academia come into play. They'll have to play a growing role in uncovering this information in order to keep developmental state capitalism alive but restrained, and to make state enterprises continue contributing to Indonesia's development. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Kim, for your interesting presentation. Yeah. So just in time, 25 minutes. Okay, now it's the panelists' turn to comment or ask questions. Okay, Mr. Almizan. So as you and I are going to become the panelists of the discussions of this seminar, so are you going to ask question first or me?
You first, me second.
Okay, all right. Okay, Mr. Kim, from your presentations, you mentioned several issues, yeah? So in this case, I would like first to touch the financial issue or the financial stability of the state enterprises in Indonesia, yeah? So as you said, the participations of the government in state enterprises is in the form of injecting capital into the state enterprises. That happens in 2015 and 16, right after Mr. Jokowi come to the power, right? And it's before COVID-19 crisis, right? Okay, so during the 2014, 15, and 16, the state enterprises
sudah kalau masih ngomongannya kayak gitu.
Yeah, has become more powerful because the fund injected by the government has increased the power or the capability of the state enterprises to borrow. Yeah, that's the leverage, right? So they can borrow from the banks, maybe from the society, from the people in the form of equity or bonds or even by IPO. So by higher capital, they have the high capability to borrow. So they have obligations to repay and to service their debt, right? During the years before the COVID, before 2020, I think the performance of the state enterprises is okay. It's not very good, but not very bad, right? But now the COVID has struck Indonesia and all other countries in the world. So what we expect that the state enterprises will continue to perform well, but since the COVID, it has become a crisis for the enterprises because many enterprises, especially in the transportation sector, in the electricity sector or in other utility sectors, they have been hit by this pandemic crisis. So the government has to come again into the rescue. Yeah, the government has to inject money again, and the government has to enlarge or to increase the deficit of the Indonesian fiscal budget. So the burden now has become stronger, yeah, because if the government don't interfere, don't help the enterprises, then they will collapse. Yeah, they will go bankrupt. So the government has to help them again. The problem is that, as we all know, the state enterprise in Indonesia are not efficient. Before the injection of the fund, very a few state enterprises give the government dividend. Yeah, if they give dividend, it means the performance is good. They contribute to the government funds, to the government revenues. But very few of them are efficient, are profitable. Yeah, most of them need support from the government. Not like Petronas in Malaysia. In Petronas in Malaysia has been very successful all over the world. They have investment in all over the world, and they have become very profitable and contribute significantly to the Malaysian government revenues. But if we compare with Pertamina, it's very far. Yeah, the difference is very far. Petronas has been able to promote uh, uh, their business by appearing in the F1 series. Yeah, you know, the racing car F1. So it shows that they are very good company. But Pertamina, no way. Yeah. So in this case, what I'm afraid that by helping more and more without increasing the efficiency or the performance of the state enterprises, the government will always continue to provide funds from the state, from the government. So in this case, it is difficult for state enterprises to become more efficient, profitable, if they don't in if they don't uh, increase their efficiency, they improve the governance. So that's the first one, I think. They need to increase their efficiency by reorganizing. You mentioned that the government will form a superior holding company by integrating many companies or similar sector into one big company. But the problem, as you said, many weak companies maybe will have to be subsidized by bigger companies, by stronger companies. Now, that's maybe it's not really a way out. Yeah? So in this case, I think we need to increase the efficiency, the performance first. I don't know, or maybe we need to hire professionals, if not from Indonesia, maybe from other countries. In Malaysia, Malaysian Airways, the Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad has to hire a professional from other countries to run the MAS. So in this case, we need to measure the performance. We need to give the state enterprises the target, the objective. If they don't achieve the target, the government should not help them. They should learn how to become efficient, how to be competitive, so that they can stand on itself. They are mandiri, yeah. They are self-sufficient, or they are so they can survive in whatever situation, in any crisis. So in this case, I think we need to be efficient first. And the second thing that I want to ask, I see your presentation on nepotism. We see many high-ranking officials, like many ministers, come from the business background. Yeah? Like the state minister, the Erick Thohir, and also many other ministers. Prabowo Subianto, but I think you forgot to mention Mr. Luhut. You know Mr. Luhut Panjaitan. He is, I think, he's the right hand of the president, Mr. Jokowi, and I think he is a big companies, big business, yeah. And because he's the second person, I don't know whether it has an effect also on the public policy making in Indonesia, because if we learn political economy, if the government needs to decide economic issue, then it will be affected by political sides, or if they decide on political issues, it will be affected by economic side. Now, what if the government needs to make a public policy, but the official has companies, maybe when they decide which project to implement, yeah, who are going to implement, I'm afraid the decision will be affected by self-interest. Yeah, self-interest. So maybe in the long run, if continue to have high-ranking officials coming from the background business, I think we will always see many corruption, many inefficiencies, because as you said, many appointees in the to sit as the commissaries or directors in the state enterprises are from the government supporters, and usually they sit there with a mission, yeah, to help the government and the members of parliament, or even in elections, yeah, to contribute to the fund for the support of the party or for the candidates. So I think there are many issues here that are not very good, yeah. So otherwise we can eradicate all these problems, although I know it is very difficult. It is a big challenge for the Indonesian state enterprises to perform as we expect, to become a main contributor to the development as state capitalism, as you mentioned. I think this is the first two questions that I would like us to ask. Please, I would like to say to give Mr. Ulfa for questions, or maybe you want to respond first. It's up to you. Okay.
Thank you, Pak Chandra.
Yeah.
Pak Kim, are you going to collect questions and answers collectively, or you just want to answer directly with Pak Chandra question? But I would suggest you may collect several short questions. For me, there is two short questions. Maybe here, Dr. Junaidi is already here. Maybe he has some short question. And Pak Agus, Dr. Agus, maybe he has some question, because they are also very limited times. Pak Junaidi, Dr. Junaidi has two meetings simultaneously, and also Dr. Agus has two Zoom meetings simultaneously. So if it's okay with you, I would add some short questions, and Dr. Junaidi maybe also have some short questions, and Dr. Agus Panar Sukri has some short question. Is it okay with you?
Completely fine.
Okay, I have two short questions. First, related with opportunity cost. Maybe you could talk a little bit about opportunity cost of SU assets. And second question is, why are you worrying that state banks has a very large market share? That is only my question, two questions. And right now, maybe Dr. Junaidi has some short question, and followed by Dr. Agus have some question, maybe. Thank you.
Pak Al.
Okay.
Hi, Mr. Kims. Nice to finally being able to see you, even though through the virtual screen. I would like to give the opportunity to others to ask. I have time, even though I'm not running to screens right now, but I would rather give others the opportunity to ask. And if there is some other times left, then I would like to, then I would like to ask. Or if you have time at the end, I just want to hear probably what do you think of the suggested solution of the current situation faced at the Ministry of State-Owned Enterprises. It's not short. Well, the question is short, but then again, I have to ask. That will be very long. So you can leave it at the end as you may have time. Yeah. And then I do have comments to Pak Imrullah, Pak Chandra, for his comments earlier on that I would like to add on also later on at the end, if we have time. Thank you.
Can you do it now, Mr. Gani? I think. Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe,
all right. Now, I just want to add about some improvement in the state-owned enterprises control or direction at this moment. As of recently, as of 2 weeks ago or so, the Minister of State Enterprises, Pak Erick Thohir, has required that each CEO or board of directors, board of management, and some I think that's whichever are required to sign a very detailed and specific KPI.
Oh, yeah.
About what to achieve, what to do, what to implement over the next years or over the next year, which means to me it's a very big progress, provided that the content of KPI has some material substance and relevant to support the objective, the real objective of the company, for the sake interest of the company. Now, I myself experienced that because now being part of the state-owned enterprises, the board of directors in the company I'm with, they all have to sign the KPI for the next year. And then as the chairman of the company at the subholding, I have to co-sign to acknowledge that my board of directors now signed this sort of commitment to the state-owned enterprises, which is good. Another one I would like to add, some of the improvement in the selection of the people. Certain companies have adopted something new. I'll give you my own example. For fit and proper test, to test my integrity, I have to go to, Ms. Kim is familiar with this, chartered securities and Chartered Investment and Securities Institute in London. So that sort of task that I have to go and to see what score I could make in terms of my integrity. So it's not just anyone can do that. I know that not everybody pass, not everybody score very high, but this is the sort of, this is something new which I think it's a good progress. That how an independent organization, institute who has nothing to do with Indonesia, who knows no one and do not have any information about the person who will be tested, suddenly they have to test that. because we were informed only a few hours before the test. So,
okay,
they say,
I think that's good progress.
You have so many hours, prepare yourself, contact this number, or you will be contacted by this number.
Okay, thank you, Mr. John.
Okay, thank you.
I think the time is limited, so thank you for your update. It's a very good progress. Hopefully, it will become a help tool for Indonesian state enterprises.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, back to Mr. Almizan.
Terima
Mr.
kasih. Merci beaucoup, Pak Junaidi. Now, Dr. Agus, it's your time, Dr. Agus.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Almizan, Pak Chandra. Mr. Kim, thank you for your great presentation. I just have one question for you. That Indonesia have a goal to be a developed and prosperous country in 2045 in our 100th anniversary. In 1970, Indonesia and South Korea were in the same condition, but now South Korea has become a developed country. We ask to you, what your recommendation to us on what Indonesia should do so that in the next 25 years, Indonesia can become a developed country like South Korea and other developed countries. Thank you. What is your recommendation? Thank you, Pak Chandra and Mr. Kim and Mr. Almizan.
Thank you, Pak Gus. I think Mr. Kyunghoon Kim can answer the question now.
Yeah. So first answer Pak Chandra's comments and questions. So during the first 2 years of Jokowi's term, the government injected lots of capital, so especially the construction companies can leverage that enlarged equity to tap into the bond market domestically and in the international market. And also the state banks and development banks such as SMI have provided lots of money to these construction companies. So overall, even though the government injected lots of equity, the financial indicators do show that there was a significant deterioration in the financial position. And many media articles have highlighted this issue, and this is something serious, of course. But at the moment, I think it's not at a high level of risk. And of course, we need to think about how to utilize the assets that it has in its hands after building lots of toll roads and ports. But at the moment, before COVID-19, of course, the financial situation of construction firms and utilities was not perfect, but it was at least sustainable. Of course, COVID-19 is having a lot of effect on lots of state enterprises, especially in the transportation sectors, such as Garuda Airline. And I think this is a time that we need to differentiate the companies that have been hit by COVID-19, and also within that group, decide whether a large part of it was already due to the mismanagement before COVID-19. So I think it is time to make sure that we keep some of the state enterprises which are providing important public service provision, but at the same time to highlight the fact that many companies were being mismanaged even before COVID-19, and we should quickly devise a plan to deal with these state enterprises at this right moment. In terms of the need to increase efficiency, I completely agree that many state enterprises are poorly run and they need to improve their performance. But I want to emphasize the points that yes, dividend payments can be important indicator, but it is not the only one. So in the case of many construction companies, I'm sure that the government could increase the dividend ratio significantly and try to gain more dividends from these companies. But at this right moment, I think the main focus is to expand infrastructure, to increase investment. And therefore, I think the government has been controlling the level of dividend ratios so the companies can have more cash in hands. And the worry about business background, yes, some people argue that we need more people with business background in state enterprise and the Ministry of State Enterprises, because we already have very many bureaucrats in this ministry and state enterprises. But at the same time, there's a worry about the business connections of these people with business background, the professionals with the business background, that they would try to benefit those businesses using state enterprises. So I think it is a big dilemma for the government whether to choose people from business background to improve the performance of state enterprises and to divert their energy into improving state enterprises rather than benefiting themselves. And I think we will need a clear communication from the ministry and a strategy to make sure that these people with business background focus on state enterprises businesses. And as Pak Yunadi said, I think the ministry is definitely taking few steps to achieve this goal. And regarding Pak Almizen's comment, opportunity cost, yes. I haven't yet seen a paper or research on the calculating the opportunity cost of capital injections over the recent years. But one thing I want to highlight is that before Jokowi came into force, the speed of infrastructure development was very, very slow. And because of the large fuel subsidies, the government had limited capacity to directly invest into expanding infrastructure investment. And over the past 5 years, yes, there have been delays and inefficiencies in many of the projects, but I believe that there have been notable progress in many of the infrastructure projects, some of which have been delayed for years and decades. So I think we need to take both qualitative and quantitative indicators, considering the historical performance of other development programs which relied on private sector to measure the level of contribution of state enterprises to Indonesia's development. And am I worried about market share of banks? Not right at the moment, but there have been many criticisms about the expanding market share of state enterprises in various sectors. And because the financial sector is like the central pillar of the economy, I believe that the criticism of the expanding market share of banks have also been pretty strong. And what I suggest is that the government should communicate with the market and the market players that what its plans are in terms of its market shares and which subsectors that it is going to enter, so the private sector can also have some sense of the state's plan, and so they can also devise their own business strategies, considering the government's long-term, medium-term plans in terms of market share and business scope. And Pak Yunadi's comment on suggestive solutions. So I've got many solutions to give, but the most important message that I want to give is that the Ministry of State Enterprises has now become one of, or the most important ministry over the past 5 years. But the level of communication has been not very great. So many people are questioning what the government or what the Ministry of State Enterprises and state enterprises are doing with this massive government capital injection and subsidies. But on its website, in many government documents, it is very difficult to find what the performance has been so far. And also, people want to find out that there are many media articles about Jokowi's supporters and people with business background entering the ministry. And there are many articles on with suspicions that these people might use state enterprises for their own benefits rather than for Indonesia's development. And I believe that the government can more actively communicate and clarify these issues to persuade the public that development of state capitalism will have a positive effect on Indonesia's development. Pak Agus's question, recommendations to achieve or to become a rich country by 2045, based on Korea's experience. This is like the most difficult question ever. But I believe that, because the economic structure and the population structure and the comparative advantage of Korea in the 1980s and that of Indonesia at this right moment are completely different. So each country needs to adopt a different strategy to revive economic growth. But I want to highlight that it's about time that Indonesian government seriously considers the importance of economic structures, and it needs to think about how to attract investment in improving productive capabilities. And of course, the Indonesian government itself has an important role in investing directly or indirectly through state enterprises. And I believe that this idea has been embraced over the past 5 years to a certain extent, and that's why the Indonesian government has started investing in infrastructure and natural resource refining, and in some cases, manufacturing sectors.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kim, for your comment and for your response to the questions. There are two questions written in the chat room. First, this is in Bahasa Indonesia. I would like to translate it into English. The government is confident that the establishment of the holding company is one of the measures that can rescue the state enterprises in Indonesia. What is your opinion? That's the question from Mr. Muller. The second question from Ibu Santi Lisana. Is there any impact of the infrastructure project development? Or maybe, is there any proof that the infrastructure project that has been developed are successful? Maybe that's what is meant by Ibu Santi Lisana. I paraphrase it. I paraphrase the question. Thank you. Now you can answer it.
So first of all, so creating holding companies in the mining and energy industry, I believe, have had a significant impact on the strategy in these two sectors. So they've used the enlarged assets to purchase the shares in Freeport Indonesia and Vale Indonesia. And also for Pertamina, after merging or creating a holding company with PGN, with the enlarged assets, it has started to acquire many of the fields that previously foreign companies operated. So I believe that in some sectors, it could have the desired effect, as we are seeing in the energy and mining sectors. But what I'm arguing is that this holding company structures may not fit everyone. And and I think the government is trying to keep everyone, every single state enterprise. And if we create a holding company and include those even weak state enterprises, that the performance of everyone will increase. But I don't think that's right. I think, yes, do create holding companies in some sectors, but we do need to sort out many state enterprises with poor performance, not just profitability, but poor contribution to Indonesia's development, and maybe liquidate or privatize many of these companies that are not contributing much to Indonesia's development, at the same time as creating holding companies and improving the corporate governance and the corporate structure of these holding companies. And in terms of infrastructure projects, I think I've got some figures, not right in front of me, but I do have figures that in terms of improving the quality and quantity of roads, railways, and ports, have accelerated significantly over the past 5 years compared to the decade before Jokowi came into office. So I think we are seeing acceleration of development in some infrastructure sectors, but obviously there have been more problems in sectors such as airports and electricity generation because of many issues such as stalled demand and also problems related to land acquisition and so on. But I think these are some of the projects that the government needs to carry out with a long-term view, at least in a situation that Indonesia is currently in. And I think we can expect to see some progress in the future in these latter areas.
Okay, any other questions from the participants? Well, while waiting for other participants to ask questions, I would like to ask Mr. Kim. So your suggestion or your recommendations is that the government should be more active in communicating with the public, yeah, about the government's injection of funds or government's of help.
Motives.
Right? Motives, yeah.
Motives, performance,
Motives,
and
performance.
so on.
Why do you suggest that that as it is necessary, as important? Because if we observe the recent developments in the Indonesian policy making, Mr. Jokowi has secured majority in the parliament. Almost all the political parties support Mr. Jokowi. Even for a very controversial law that has been passed recently, Undang-Undang Cipta Kerja or job creation law. It has created a lot of protests, demonstrations, so big, yeah. But the government still has its way, yeah. So it has succeeded in passing the law. So the issue is very, very big. But these state enterprises, I think maybe not a very big issue for most Indonesians, because many of them don't know the effect of state enterprise or the role of the state enterprises. So if the government wants to do anything with the state enterprises, they can do that, because the majority of the parliament members are always in support of the government right now. So in this case, whatever the government wants to do, they can have a big challenge in the parliament. Or maybe in the public, maybe there are some issues, maybe some protests or some critics, but I think it's not very significant right now. But I don't know if in the future, if many state enterprises, for instance, are not sustainable, they collapse, they bankrupt, and maybe it's a big issue whether the government should rescue the state enterprises, like, for instance, Garuda Indonesia. As we know, Malaysia in the Malaysia Airways, Malaysia Enterprises in MAS, I think it's also a big debate in Malaysia whether to rescue the MAS or not. But Indonesia, we don't know what will happen. If the pandemic passed by next year, maybe the government doesn't need to rescue many state enterprises like Garuda Indonesia. But if the pandemic continues to worsen, maybe the government should consider whether to rescue some of these enterprise owners. So maybe it will create a big issue. But for the time being, I think the government can connect with the public, but I think they are not very concerned with that, because they are sure they have the backing of the people and almost all the members of the parliament. That's the question.
Thank you. Yes. So in most countries, people are not that interested in state enterprises, although I believe they should be, since they play a very, very big role in many economies and societies. But yes, I agree that many people are not interested in state enterprises, what they're doing, how they are being funded. But what I'm suggesting is some kind of a precautionary measure for the government, because if we think about the second Yudhoyono administration, the biggest issue was the Hambalang case. And at the center of this corruption case was state enterprises. If you think about the Petrobras in Brazil, that was also in the middle of the huge political chaos that led to the impeachment of the president. And if you think about Malaysia, 1MDB corruption scandal was possibly the biggest corruption biggest political scandal over the past 10 years or so. So what I'm saying is that when these corruption cases happen in many developing countries, we often find state-owned entities at the center of these corruption cases. And I believe that communicating better and providing more information with the public and persuading the importance of these state-owned entities for development is some kind of a precautionary measure to avoid these chaotic situations. And also, it's a way of alerting the managers and directors at state enterprises. So the government says we're going to provide all this information, so you better get your act together, right? So I think it's some kind of a message to the public and also to the management system that will make development of state capitalism more sustainable.
Very interesting. Any questions?
Pak Junaidi, maybe you have some other questions? Pak John, we haven't heard your voice.
Okay, Mr. Almizan, thank you very much, Pak Almizan.
Okay.
Hello, Mr. Kim. Nice to meet you this evening. Now,
Hello.
I have a question about what the topic, what you have presented today, but it is not directly connected.
That's fine.
Yeah. After listening what you have presented in the seminar, I really believe that you really know a lot about the economy of Indonesia, especially about state-owned enterprise. Is it? I'm really amazed.
I did my PhD thesis on state
Oh,
enterprise.
I see. Okay, okay. Thank you. I'm really amazed of it. Last few years, you know, government of Indonesia is trying very hard to take over enterprise owned by foreign countries to be state-owned enterprise. For example, PT Chevron Pacific Indonesia. Do you have ever heard about PT Chevron Pacific Indonesia? One of foreign company, oil company. Excuse me?
I think I might have heard the name somewhere.
One of foreign company in oil company in Indonesia will be taken over by government of Indonesia, which will be operated by Pertamina by 2021. How do you think about what the government of Indonesia is doing, especially in the professional point of view? That's my question.
Okay, I think the Jokowi government, like many other emerging economic governments, have been trying to push state enterprises to go global. So some companies have been acquiring assets abroad, like Pertamina. I think it has recently acquired a share in a French company, French oil company, which has some assets in Africa, I think. And also it has pushed manufacturing companies such as Dirgantara Indonesia to export things like airplanes, trains, and ships. And I believe that the size of these acquisitions and exports are very small, but I think it's going in the right direction in that it's being exposed to global competition, and which I believe could strengthen these manufacturing companies and energy companies' capacity. But of course, that when they send money abroad, there's lots of things that can happen that can go wrong. So I believe that we need to keep a close eye on these international operations. But at the same time, in terms of corporate management point of view, I think it is going in the right direction in that they can try to compete against some of the smaller firms at the international stage and improve their capabilities.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Kim, I have a question for you. When I was a student doing my PhD, I read that in Korea, Mr. Park Chung-hee, the former president of Korea, also used state capitalism to develop Korea, and very successful at that. If I'm not mistaken, he summoned several CEO of the conglomerates in Korea, and they are given a task to build the India sector, to develop their sector like shipbuilding, heavy industries, car manufacturing, aeroplanes, etc., etc. And it was very successful. So the role of the state enterprise in Korea is very important in developing Korea until now. But now, of course, more private enterprises perform, yeah. But I think the development of Korea is supported insignificantly by the state enterprises. So what Indonesia can learn from the Korea experience in developing state capitalism?
Thank you. So, I mean, the starting point of the modern economic development after independence was somewhat different in Indonesia and Korea. Because obviously Korea had a very anti-socialist communist economic stance. And compared to other countries like Indonesia, which embraced the socialist ideas in the 50s and 60s, I think Korea had a relatively smaller state-owned sector compared to other developing countries. It did have some big state enterprises such as POSCO, which produced steel, and which now is a global company after being privatized. But the major driver or major actors in Korea's successful development story is these big, large conglomerates, which benefited significantly from the government policy support and finance. So the policy implications for Indonesia would be that, or we should first ask the question, what are big businesses in Indonesia doing at this right moment? Are they investing in improving productive capabilities and trying to enter new sectors? Or are they just enjoying their near monopoly or oligopoly positions in the food industry and mining industries? I think there's very little investment going on in improving productivity capacity from the private sector. And the government should seriously think about how they can mobilize private investment to improve the patterns of structural transformation, because there will be a limit to which state capital can do by itself. So maybe, yes, it can build roads, it can improve some of the infrastructure, and maybe it can protect some strategic assets in the mining sector and the energy sectors. But if we are to transform the economic structure so it creates more value added and in a more sustainable way, I think the government needs to try harder, do more to use the private investment in other productive sectors other than infrastructure, mining, and energy.
Okay, thank you. A question from Ms. Ibu Santi. Based on your studies so far, what is your perspective on our Indonesia state enterprises? Is it in the right trend?
So this is a very difficult question. Yes and no. I think yes, because there have been many development projects that have been stalled for years and decades after the global financial crisis. And I think the government does have a big role to play in accelerating the speed of infrastructure projects, for example. And also the private sector has very little interest in entering new emerging industries, although Indonesia has a very large assets, large resources and market. So the government could play some kind of a role in protecting its strategic assets and using it to negotiate with foreign countries. But because of many issues that I've highlighted, such as corruption, nepotism, and lack of information available to the public, and so on, I think there are areas where the government needs to put in more efforts so the development of state capitalism can be more sustainable. And I also suggested during the presentation, the government won't do this by itself. So the media, the NGOs and the academia need to pressure government to share more information and to be more clear about the direction and the content of its development strategy.
Okay, thank you. Almizan, are you going to say something?
Yes, please, Pak Chandra. We have right now still 14 participants, but some of them hasn't have a voice yet. Maybe Bu Rahma, Bu Edmalia, Pak Husni, Bu Leni, etc. will have some things to say. If not, I think, Pak Kim, you might add some suggestions for improving sustainable government policy in state-owned enterprise, if you have. You want to add some suggestion or some recommendation, some other recommendation from our discussion this morning, Pak Kim?
Okay, so my message is that I would like to see the government sharing more information and communicating with the public about these key issues that I mentioned in the presentation, such as the effect of expanding state enterprises on the fiscal situation, and the rationale of this particular reorganization method that concentrates on creating sectoral holding companies, and also how far and how deep state enterprises will go, so the private sector understands the reasons for their expansion, and they can also plan their business operation. And perhaps more importantly, the government needs to have a structural reform to deal with these corruption and nepotism problems. And of course, there will be backlash from the businesses which are connected or which are benefiting from the state-owned sector and also from the bureaucrats and politicians. But in order to sustain this developmental state capitalism without sorting these problems, it will be impossible.
Okay, thank you, Pak Kim. Pak Chandra, Pak
Yes.
Jun, Pak Junaidi Gani, Pak Agus.
I'm fine, thank you. That's all right.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Kim.
Okay, any other
Thank you.
questions? What time are you going to finish, Pak Almizan?
So I think we have anytime longer than ever. Yeah? We can discuss as long as we like. However, yeah, maybe we can talk leisurely, and I would stop the recording. And personally, I would like to thanks to Pak Kim, which is very great presentation. Dr. Junaidi, Dr. Agus Panar Sukri, Pak John Barus, Pak Muller, Pak Chandra, Ibu Rahma, Ibu Santi, and there are several others which I haven't met before. And right now we have Dr. Dedi, which is really together, which is really coming together, discussing together with us. Now he is still connecting to his audio. I think, if I may, I would stop the recording and we could talk leisurely if time is still available with Pak Kim, because right now it's already lunchtime, maybe in London. Yeah, I don't know. So I would stop the recording if there is no other questions. Is it okay? Then I'll stop the recording.
Mr. Kim, are you still available? Do you still want to ask